Should I write a book about my childhood trauma? Now, that question right there is something I think many of us ask ourselves for years. I did. And we can see just here, I wrote my book, Breaking the Silence, and I published this. I think I wrote it in 2020 and I published it in 2021. So Breaking the Silence, Stories from Survivors of Sexual Abuse. I wrote this at the time because I wanted to communicate my story in a way that I hadn't done yet. I was very much on the path of pain to purpose and trying to get my story out there to help people. I hadn't written a book yet. So the reason why I wrote this was so that for someone who might not see my story on Instagram, they might pick up my book and read it. And also, even if they did see my story on Instagram, being able to sit with a 130-page book, which is short compared to a lot of books, but it's also quite long compared to a lot of books too. They can really intimately sit with my story, and the more intimate one can be with another in terms of storytelling, the more that they can see themselves in that story and the more that you can help that person. So coming back to the question of, I've got some type of childhood trauma, should I write about it? Really, the short answer is yes, you should. You don't need to publish it if you don't want to. Many times people think, well, if you're going to write a book, then automatically that means publishing a book. That's not necessarily the case, because you have full control, you have full power. So you don't need to publish it if you don't want to. Although what you'll find is that more times than not, once you've gotten to the end of the writing process, the version of you then compared to the version of you before you've written is two very different people. And that version of you will be the person like, I will publish this and I'm going to find a way to do that. Whether I publish this under a pseudonym, whether I use my name but I change every single identifying detail as possible in this book, you'll find a way. But the key is not to worry about that now. Because what we need to understand is that, I think what it really comes down to is understanding the power of writing our story. When we understand the power of, when we understand the power of writing our story, that right there is when we don't really see any other option but to pick up that pen and start writing, because we know that through the process of writing our story, we are just going to become a different person, you know. And one of the biggest, and there is countless studies on this, you know, and I've got a researcher, an absolute G of a guy, his name's Glenn, he's in our community, which you can find in the link of the description on my YouTube channel, probably underneath this video, so you can definitely check it out. We help trauma survivors to write their stories, write their books, publish their books if they want to do that. We show them everything in there. Glenn, he published his book with us, and he is, a big chunk of what he does is researching into hard topics and trying to create noise, trying to create changes. And he's been studying a lot of the survivors inside the community and the journey that they've gone on whilst writing. And, you know, you could find lots of different things out there online in regards to the therapeutic powers of writing. And I think if you're watching this video, you probably have whether it's a firm or a loose grasp on just how important it is to write. Maybe you've journaled before, maybe you have had a therapist, or you have a therapist and they've told you to journal. You understand the power of writing. But it definitely takes a humongous shift when you go from journaling to writing a full narrative from beginning to end. Because what happens then is you're forcing yourself to sit in the trenches because you wanted to do it. Because it's the thing, if you're journaling, you're writing fragmented memories. You're writing, you know, what happened when you was 12, and you might stop because it gets a bit difficult. And then, I don't know, you take a couple of days or you write about something else and you come back to that. Because you haven't really been able to iron out those creases, you tend to come back to those creases and you tend to circle around and find it very hard to move on. But if you can write a full-on narrative, a full-on story from beginning to end, a memoir, if you watch a film like a biopic and you're seeing that whole journey, you're able to see your story through a different lens. You're able to see that story of yourself. In a way, you become detached from it. Not to begin with, because you're very much in it. But the more that you write it, the more you read it, the more you write it, the more you read, as you continue down that process, you start to see yourself distance ever so slightly from that story. And it's not in a bad way, it's in an empowering way, because you're not being lost in it. You've taken your head out of the sands and you're able to see, holy shit, okay, I've gone on this massive journey. I've gone from X, Y, and Z when I was 6 to X, Y, and Z when I was 12, but I did this when I was 14, I did that when I was 18, and then this happened when I was 21, but you know what, when I was 22, I was able to do this, and now I'm 33, and I got kids, and blah, 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 blah. Here I am now, and then boom, you know what? And oftentimes, as you get through that whole process and you start to connect the dots to understand how you got to where you are today, how you are the way you are, the path moving forward starts to become a lot clearer. You start to be like, okay, well, maybe the pain that I've been living with can now actually start to become my purpose. Maybe I do want to really write a book, like properly. Maybe I want to publish it. Maybe I want to become a speaker. Maybe I want to start a charity. Maybe I want to start a business. Or maybe I just want to become a better communicator with my kids. Maybe I want to become a better role model for my nieces and nephews. Maybe I want to stand up to my abuser. Maybe I want to sit my parents down and say, hey, how you did this really was fucked up. And I want to tell you how that made me feel. Because it's time. All of those elements start to really become clear when you're writing your story. And I truly, truly believe that everyone who has been through something in life should write their story. Because not just for the healing powers that come from writing in that therapeutic way, but simply because you're able to truly know who's looking back at you in the mirror after you've written your story. And that's where things really start to shift. So if we're going to come back to the question of should you write about your childhood abuse, your childhood trauma, the answer is yes, you should. Should you, at the same time, make sure you have things in place to help you on that journey? Yes, you should too. Because writing on your own, it can be very tough. Depending on where you are on your healing journey, it can be very triggering. I think the chances are quite high that it might be triggering. So you definitely need to think about what is the right steps that you want to put into place just to make sure that you've got some anchoring as you move throughout this process. It could be having a therapist / counsellor. Definitely make sure you've got one of those. It could be joining a community. And this is one of the biggest things that I found with having my Powerful Books community, which I've had for now over 3 years, is that the community aspect of being surrounded by other guys and gals and survivors and warriors of different types of trauma, it makes you truly understand that you're not alone. Because when you've been through trauma in life, yes, you have the overall thing. Like for me, for example, I went through childhood abuse by my step-granddad. That right there is a summary in one sentence. So if I now meet someone else in the community who was also sexually abused as a child by a family member, we got a connection. But then as we start to get on calls or we start to chat, and they say about the specifics of how that family member groomed them throughout the years, how maybe the survivor at certain points thought that they enjoyed it as a kid. You see all these fine details, those are things that don't necessarily get picked up in a one sentence. And they're also very much things that there's a lot of shame attached to that. So the chances of you just bringing it up casually is very, very slim. So if you hear someone else say that and they open up this doorway for you to be honest and vulnerable back to them, that right there is just half of the healing, to go with the writing. And it's humongous. So joining a community can be another one, whether that's the community that I run, whether it's an in-person writing group. Maybe ask your therapist if they have something in person. Definitely have some type of support system. And then another one that is also very much key for a lot of the writers in my community is having some type of anchor to pull them out of that writing session. So let's just say, for example, you're setting yourself an hour every morning. Doesn't matter, it could be an hour a day, it could be 2 hours on a Saturday. Really, what the thing, without going off on a tangent here, but the overarching factor of success when it comes to ensuring that when you start writing to you actually finishing and you've got a book in your hand is just doing 1% more each day. And that's not, that 1% doesn't necessarily mean writing, like you've written another word or another sentence or another chapter or whatever. It just means 1% more around the whole topic, because writing your book, there's many different slices to that pie. If you imagine the book is the whole pie, writing is just one slice. Talking to family members is another slice. Shifting how you see yourself, that identity that you have, is another slice. There's so many different facets to it. So my tangent has lost my train of thought now. I can't remember where I was originally at. Anyway, so, the anchoring. There we go. So when you have finished that writing session, figuring out what it is, and this will come through trial and error, figuring out what it is that you can have straight after that writing session that brings you comfort, that relaxes your nervous system, that brings you joy. It could be simply just walking outside barefoot into grass or pavement, i.e. touching Mother Nature, being grounded. Could be something. Putting on a comedy show, Friends, The Office, whatever it is another thing to bring humor into your life straight after that session. It could be spending time with your family. It could be going to the gym. It is something that tends to be a physical thing that anchors you, so you're not just being lost with the waves that are sort of crashing towards you. It's more so just having that insurance. So the chances that you will just get the right thing straight off the bat is slim, but having the sort of the persistence to figure out what it is the right thing to do. So that's the only thing that I will say as you're thinking about this whole process, is to definitely make sure you have an anchor once you have finished your writing session for that day. So that's pretty much it. So bottom line is, if you've been through something in life and you maybe feel like, maybe you've done therapy before, you've done journaling, but you kind of feel like your ceiling is capped and you're trying to figure out what else that you can do, you've toyed with the idea of writing a book, should you do it? Yes, 100% you should do it. So definitely think about this a bit more, and I would say, if you can, maybe within the next 24 to 72 hours, so go through just a word vomit exercise. And that kind of looks like just pen and paper or on your laptop, Google document, Word doc, on your notes, just word vomit whatever comes out. You don't need to plan it. It's more of an intuitive exercise. Feeling what your intuition wants to write about in that moment. You could argue that this is journaling. Yes, it is more like a journal prompt, but try to do it through the lens of your story and just see what comes out. All right, so that's just a takeaway exercise that you should go away and do, is a word vomit exercise of your story. And yeah, if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments underneath this video, and I would either do a new video about it, or I will just drop a reply if it's short and sweet, and then help you move forward. But bottom line is, yes, write your book.